Hello, if you've got a big pile of prints and you want to do something with them but you're not quite sure what, I've got lots of creative ideas that I'm going to show you in this video. And they cover a whole range from stationery to gifts to decorations, and I've got a couple at the end that I'm quite excited to share with you because I think it's using them in a way you might not have thought about before.
I've had these old placemats for years, although I really like the design. They've got stained and tatty, and I've been meaning to upcycle them for ages. So first of all, I gave them a bit of a light sanding, and using gesso, which you might not know was always used to prime canvases before artists would paint over them with their oil colours normally. But I like it. It's quite thin, and it did mean that I had to do several coats, but you get a good finish. It's got a nice sort of chalkiness to it, and I'd rather do that than just put one sort of thick layer on that might be a bit streaky and need a lot more sanding. And it dries really quickly because this is acrylic based, not like the original gesso that would have been made from chalk, gypsum, and I think it was rabbit skin glue. So this is much more animal friendly. And yes, I just would paint them, put them somewhere to dry, do something else, and then come back. And I think I did about 4 coats in the end. And this is doing the last coat, and you can see that I've pretty much obliterated everything underneath. If I was going to print directly on it, I might have even kept going with some more coats, but because I'm covering it with paper, I knew that that would be fine. And what I'm using for this are the prints that I made in my last but one video, I think, which was making these large prints using my Gelli plate substitute that's a lot cheaper than a regular Gelli plate. And I've picked out all my favourite ones and ones that I thought would blend well together. And I'm using some spray adhesive to attach them to the boards, and I'm using a spatula, but you could easily use an old credit card. I keep, a lot of those, and old membership cards, all that sort of thing. You just want something to push out any air bubbles. And it's really worth spending some time doing this to make sure you've got the creases and the air bubbles out. That means that once you've finished it and you've put your protective coat on, you're going to get a really good professional looking finish. And it's actually quite good to use your fingers as well as the spatula. That can be the best way of getting out the creases. And I repeated exactly the same process for the coasters. I thought it was fun to match each mat with the same print, so I chose a bit that would look particularly good on this smaller size, and it was really fun picking out the designs and patterns that I thought would look the best. And at this stage I'm not worrying too much about the edges. I'm going to go over with some acrylic medium just to make sure they're stuck down and sort of neaten them off that way. But again, I think I'm using a sort of spreader. I think that's used for grouting, really. I have all sorts of weird and wonderful tools in my collection. And then once it was dry, I made sure that I just sort of cut down the edges so there wouldn't be too much overhang when I did stick them down. Just to say that I used the adhesive spray for the putting down the paper originally because I didn't want it to get too wet, but for the edges I did use the acrylic medium just to make sure they were really stuck down. And then I used this varnish that I had for the top coat so it would be protected and it wouldn't matter if we spilt food on it, we could just wipe it off. I did realise afterwards that this was slight gloss and I didn't really like it, so I did then go over it with the matte acrylic medium just to get rid of that shine. And I want to say that while you're painting this on, it can look a bit rubbish because the paper can start to sort of bubble up as it's getting damp under the varnish or whatever you're using. But don't worry, because as it dries it will contract again and you'll still get a nice finish. You can always just go over it with the spatula if there are any wrinkles that haven't come out. But you can see how kind of prettily they've come out, and I really like the way that they're all different, but I think they complement each other rather nice. And you know how some projects take much longer than you think they're going to? This one actually was quite quick and it's so effective that I'd really recommend it if you've got some old placemats or you can buy some cheaply. There are so many ways that you can use your prints to make books, and I'll just go over a few here. This is called an accordion flag book. So you, as you see, you make accordion fold in a piece of card or thick paper, and then you just attach your prints to each little valley. And it's a very simple way to make a book. And actually, this when I made this into a reel for Instagram, it went a bit viral. I think just because it's quite simple, but it makes a really effective graphic way of displaying your prints. And on one side, I use botanicals, and then I use some abstract pieces on the other side as well. And I did another variation of it as well. So this is a very similar process, but using just botanical prints this time. And then an even simpler way to make an accordion book is to use envelopes. And I got this idea from a Gelli Arts video, I think. And I found these square envelopes and I would just print on either side. So again, I think one side I did more abstract patterns, and then I did these foliage ones using some spring flowers like primroses. And then you just have to attach them together and you've got an instant book, and it's a really effective way of displaying your prints so they're not just sitting in a pile, because you can put it on a mantelpiece or a shelf and admire them. And you can also use prints to cover books you've already made. This one had cardboard on either end, very plain and boring. And I used some of my prints that I'd done onto tissue paper, very similar to the placemats. And I just used some spray glue and cut it carefully so that it made a nice neat edge, and then instantly you've got a more attractive book. And again, I've just sealed it to make it more robust. And then this one didn't involve any glue at all. I just did two folded pieces of paper, one lengthways, one shortways, and folded that over these cardboard covers. So there really couldn't be a simpler way to add some personality to your book and to do a bit of stash busting at the same time. And then this rather dinky little book is a accordion, but this time I folded the edge over, so it means that you've got lots of pockets. And there's so many things you could use this for. Here I'm using it for to put my business cards in. I'll show you in a little bit where I kind of made it into a mini cabinet of curiosities. You could use it for keepsakes that you've collected on your holiday, or it'd be lovely to make one specially for a loved one, and you could put in anything that sort of reflects memories in your relationship. I think that would make a lovely present. So this is my little mini cabinet of curiosities with prints of fossils and some of my cyanotypes made into those tags again, and with an embroidered butterfly as well, because why not? If you want to display your prints on the wall, you could, of course, get yourself a frame and put your print in that. But I particularly like to use these wooden panels because I think they have a nice sort of depth to them, which I think shows off the prints really well. They're also very reasonably priced and they come in all shapes and sizes. I made these leaf prints and then cut them all to the size that I knew the panels came in. That's quite a good tip. If you know which panel you're going to use, you can make your prints accordingly. When you get the panels, they're just plain wood and you can print directly onto them, and I've done that quite a lot. I usually put a layer or two of gesso first just to make a nice surface to work on. But otherwise, these were mostly done on tissue paper, and then I just glued them on. They're solid enough that they will just sit on a mantelpiece like here. But another way you can use your prints on a panel like this is to make a collage. So there might be part of a print that you like but you don't like the background or one bit of it, or you just have a few things that you think would work really well together. And you can see that I'm going through my stash here and trying to find ones. I wanted to give a sort of wintry theme to this one, so I'm looking for greys and blues, and I spend quite a lot of time sort of trying out to see which goes together. It's a really fun process doing this. The sort of poncy way of saying it is I'm auditioning, but I'm just sort of trying them out to see what works well together. A good tip here is to, when you've got your composition that you're happy with, take a photograph of it, and then you've got that to refer to when you glue your pieces on. I think I decided to do one by one just to make sure I got everything in the right position, and because the glue dries quite quickly. And then I just neaten up the edges, and I'll do a last coat of the acrylic medium just to protect it. And I think I did a little bit just to sort of blend in the edges a bit more. I use my watercolours and some pencils just to try and make it a more cohesive whole. And if you're interested in this piece, I have put it in an online exhibition. It's called Traces of Time, and I'll put a link to that below. And another project I did with the leaf prints was to upcycle an old lampshade. I had painted it with a few coats of gesso first, and then I cut round the leaf prints that you saw me make earlier, which was slightly fiddly, but I just took my time. And then I worked out how I wanted to put them on the lampshade so they'd be equidistant, and put a few marks in pencil. I'd painted the lampshade with a couple of coats of gesso again because it was a little bit old and marked. If this is a project you think you might like to try, I would say don't paint a lampshade. If you can, get an old one that's just from fabric, or even one of those ones that's made out of paper, because then you'll get the light actually coming through more than this one does. And I think that would look really pretty with whatever you're attaching would glow once you've got the light on. But I'm quite pleased with how this came out, and it looks rather good in my kind of botanic corner where I've got lots of plants, as you can see here. Now, you definitely don't need to have a die cutter, which is what this is, to make your gift tags and other things, but they're really fun, and you can pick them up quite cheaply second hand, which is what I did with this one. And it just comes with these metal shapes, and it has sort of like a mangle in the middle, these sort of two rollers that push down, and you can get all sorts of shapes to make fun things with. And my most used shape is definitely this tag that came in a set with lots of different sizes. And it's quite a simple shape, and you could easily cut this out by hand. You don't need to do it like this, but I like it. It gives a little sort of indentation around the edge, and it also makes the hole ready to put your string through. And I just like the fact that you can use prints that maybe, this one that I'm using here is a little bit garish. I wasn't overly fond of the colours, but in a small space that's fine, especially if you want it to be the one colourful element that you're going to tie onto a present or a label for something. And for these red ones, this was actually a double-sided print, so I've got a slightly colour variation on either side, which is quite fun. And as I said, you can find shapes in all sorts of weird and wonderful patterns, and some of them are quite kitsch and quite tacky, but you can still find sort of just simple shapes. And this is quite a clever one because it makes a star. You just have to do two, because you can make a 3D star out of it, and it comes with little dents, so it makes the perforations, and that helps you know where to fold it. It can be a little bit tricky to get the paper off the die sometimes, but it does have these little holes that you can poke through. So I'm doing all the folds and I'm using my bone folder just to get nice sharp edges. You can just use the handle of a pair of scissors, you don't need to use this, but it's quite good to be quite accurate at this stage so that you can, so it will glue together nicely. And yeah, just using a bit of Pritt stick, and it's a little bit fiddly, but then you get these really pretty 3D shapes and you can hang them in your Christmas tree, or if you didn't use Christmassy colours, I think they could be used for other purposes as well. But that's a really fun way to use up sort of scraps of paper that you might have in your stash. And here's just some of the many tags that I've made over the years. So I've done lots of these little mini ones as well. And, you know, they use just the tiniest bit of scraps that you might have. And these aren't all Gelli prints. Some of them are cyanotype, some of them are other sorts of printing, but it's a wonderful way to use them all up. And then I've also, because I had a butterfly shape, I made this my sort of cruelty-free butterfly cabinet. And then last, and probably least, to be honest with these, but it was a good way of using up just these strips that were edges from when I cut them off to make sharper edges for whatever I was using the prints for. And I've turned them into a paper chain. Now, this is a project where you can use your really tiniest scraps. It might be that you did a print and you don't really like most of it, but there might be one or two little bits that are quite pretty. And in quilting, there's an expression called fussy cutting. It's when you want to put your motif right in the middle of, say, your hexagon, if that's what you're stitching, and you just make sure that you cut the shape exactly around that bit. And that's what you can do to make these. I got these tiny little frames. I think they were from a sort of wedding supplies place. I'll try and find a link and put that below. And I just thought they were really sweet, and I did these prints, and then on the other side I painted them in sort of iridescent paint to make them look Christmassy, and I sprayed some foliage and added those, and I made a whole range of these, and they looked really pretty, sort of hanging in some. Making cards with your prints is obviously a classic, and there are two main ways you can do this. You can print directly onto cards, and you can pick up these packs of cards and envelopes at pretty good price, and then the print is going directly onto the card, and they're ready to be Christmas cards or birthday cards, whatever you want to use them for. And here are some of the ones that I've made. I think that was the Christmas, 2 Christmases ago, if you want to see how I made those ones. But then last year I did it a slightly different way, and I printed onto larger pieces of card, and I did lots of different layers and different patterning, and using stamps as well as foliage to make these, and then I would cut them up and use them in my cards like that. Well, this was one of my favorites because it sort of came out like an old fresco. I think it was a little bit difficult to get it off the plate using the large plate here, but I really liked the effect. And then I went on and did a little bit of silver leaf. You can see that video where I go into more detail, but these made quite pretty cards. And so for these ones I used, I think they call them window cards. They cost a little bit more, but then they look quite impressive. So they're 3 parts, and you just glue your background onto the middle part and glue that bit over it, and then you've got a really sturdy and substantial card to show off your prints beautifully. So I showed you this picture earlier of this print, and this was one of my favourite ones that I did. And so what I thought I'd do is try and use it digitally. So as long as you can take a photograph of it, you don't need a scanner or anything. You can just transfer the photograph to whatever you use, your laptop, your phone, or your iPad, and there's just software that's just so amazing today that you can do almost anything with it. And I uploaded this and then I played around with different colours, and I did quite a few of my leaf prints as well and put them all in a pattern. I did a design for an ox because I was doing a public art competition. I put 2 designs in, actually the other one was chosen, but I used all these leaf prints that I'd done physically but uploaded them, and I'll show you how that I played around them in the software. I like to use this program called Procreate, which is fantastic. It's quite reasonable. You just do a one-off payment and you can paint and draw digitally with it, but you can also manipulate photographs and you work in layers, and it's just a really creative way of using your images. So you can see I uploaded the leaf print and then I took the background away and then I tried it out with lots of different backgrounds. And the only thing is you can spend hours doing this because it's so much fun trying out lots of different colorways. You can see here I did that with all the leaf prints and I put them on another background. I tried out different colorways, and yes, I'll put in the picture that I did of my ox. And then another interesting thing is that I actually made an animation using these leaves, and you can see that at the end of the video. It was just to use as a sort of promo on Instagram. And then another thing you can do if you've input your pictures digitally, I turn mine into a calendar, and some of them I used just as they were, some of them I changed the colour and played about with them, and then I got it printed by this company. I put the details below and made it came out really nicely. I was really pleased with it, and I did that last year. I'm not doing one this year because it is quite time consuming. I might do another one next year. And then not only that, once you have your picture in digital form, you can then have it printed on all sorts of things. And I don't know if you can see it from there, but you might recognise that print as the same as that one. Let me just go and get it. So this print, you can see if I hold them there, they are the same, but obviously a bit blown up, but I think they caught the detail really well actually. And I'll link the company. There are lots of them, but this one does, you can get things printed on absolutely everything and any sort of fabric that you might want. Do you know, this was actually a tea towel because it was quite a bit cheaper than some of the other fabrics, and I thought I'll just see what quality it is, and it's actually quite nice sort of cotton, probably a little bit more coarser cotton than I would normally use, but I think it's come out well. And I just put some wadding and some of my hand-dyed fabric on the back, and you can actually see on the back more easily that I did a lot of quilting to sort of pick out the shapes, and then did some filler stitch all the way round, and then I put a binding on it, and it makes now got a wall hanging. So I think that just shows you, there's just huge potential in putting your own design that you've made physically onto all sorts of things. So I really hope you enjoyed that and you're inspired to put your designs, because, it's a shame if they're just sitting in a pile in the corner or in a drawer somewhere and you're not sharing them. And do look out for my video will be coming up in the next month or so when I do a botanical Christmas theme with cards, gift tags and wrapping paper. And in the meantime, I'll link my playlist that's got all the techniques that I talked about today. And I hope you'll join me again soon.